Ah, a nice little spot to show everyone your best self. And a place for your fluffy, impy friend to live. Make yourself comfortable. Here's where you come to customize your imp. This is just a small selection. There will be lots more soon. This is where my imp keeps track of all the imp quests you've completed, and the ones you've still to try. If you're ever short of something to do, just come here, or visit my imp in your home space. This composition is so wonderful. It defies description. Everyone loves taking photos. Take a picture of that beautiful vista you've made. Or snap that odd creation you just found, just to make sure your eyes aren't deceiving you.
Howdy, partner. Cuthbert's always wanted to be a star, so I've cast him and Connie in a drama set in the wild west of the Dreamiverse. But this scene needs a director, and I thought you would be the perfect person for the job.
We're gonna use cameras and text gadgets to tell the story of how Deputy Connie apprehended Cuthbert the candy thief.
But you won't get far without a camera, so I better show you where to get one. Open the assembly menu with the square button, then select Gadgets. Close any open sub-menus with circle, then open the Cameras and Lighting section. Find the camera. The icon is an old-fashioned movie camera. Select it with X. This camera is going to capture our opening shot. See how the gadget has a little camera gizmo attached to it? Point it roughly at Connie, then stamp one with R2 or X. Once you've stamped one, unequip the gadget by pressing circle. Before we look at the framing, there's a few things we can tweak on the camera that'll help us achieve a cinematic look. Hover your imp over the camera, then open its tweak menu with L1 and square. The transition type settings let you change how cameras activate. By choosing different curves and adjusting the transition time slider, you can blend cameras together. But for a dramatic scene like this one, we'll be using the cut transition. It's the button with the scissors icon. The cut transition is instant, so there's no need to set a time for the transition. Below the transitions is the field of view slider. The wider the field of view, the more you'll be able to see with the camera. You can leave it set to its default value for now, but you might want to make adjustments later. Finally, we're going to turn on black bars. It's the button at the bottom. This will put a letterbox on the camera to give it a widescreen look. Move on to the next step, and we'll look at framing the camera. Right, let's frame the shot properly. Cameras only activate in play mode and test mode. But we can preview and edit the framing with a simple shortcut. Hover over the camera gadget, then hold L1 and press X. It's just like scoping in. We're now looking through the lens of the camera. But not just looking, we can also edit the camera's position just by using the normal movement controls. If your camera's a little wonky, it's no problem. It'll automatically level itself out if you move it with the left or right sticks. Isn't that clever? Position the camera with Connie and Cuthbert at either side of the frame for their confrontation. Here's another tip for editing cameras. You can use the up and down directional buttons to change the field of view. And you can still use the tweak menu while editing the camera, so you can see the effect of the changes you make. Once your shot is perfectly framed, use the shortcut L1 and circle to exit the camera. We've set the scene. Now it's time for the drama to play out. Move on to the next step when you're ready to start telling the story. The simplest way to show text on screen is to use a text displayer. Open the assembly menu and go to Gadgets. In the Movers and Outputs section, you'll find a handful of gadgets for displaying text and numbers. The icon for the text displayer is two speech bubbles on a screen. Select it with X and stamp one in the scene, then unequip the gadget. A text displayer is pretty useless without text, so let's add some. Open the text displayer tweak menu with L1 and square. On the first page of the tweak menu is a box to enter text. This is going to be Connie's opening line of the scene. Connie has come to Cuthbert's hut to confront him about the stolen candy, so make the line challenging and dramatic. I'll give you a moment to think about Connie's line. Once you've got something, you can move on to the next step. We now have a dramatic opening line, but it doesn't look very good yet. Text always displays middle left on the screen, but while the tweak menu is open, we can grab and move it with R2. By default, the text is pinned to the screen, no matter where the gadget is. You can resize the text with the up and down directional buttons. Move it to the right side of the screen so it's on the same side as Connie on camera. Now let's tweak how the text looks. The first page of the tweak menu has options for changing the appearance of the text. Let's see if there's a more appropriate font. Scroll through the list using the up and down directional buttons. On page 2 of the tweak menu, you can change how the box looks. Find the option for tail shape. Adding a tail will turn the box into a speech bubble. There's a few different tails to choose from. How about zigzag to make it look like Connie's shouting? A positional gizmo appears with the tail, so you can change the length and direction of it. That looks about right. There's plenty more options for customizing the text displayer. Take a look through the rest of the menu and try them out. On the text box properties page, you can make the box more rounded or change its colour. The border properties page lets you change the look of the border or get rid of it completely. You can add a fleck texture to the text box using the option on the texture properties page. When you like how your text looks, close the tweak menu, then give it a test in play mode. Oh, something's not right here. My camera's too close to Connie, so when she's possessed, the view switches to the camera built into her controller sensor. I don't want to change the position of the camera, so it needs to be put on a timeline. When you're ready to continue, return to edit mode, rewind time with L3, and start the next step. We have an establishing camera and a dramatic opening line. Now we need to incorporate them into the rest of the scene. On Cuthbert's shed, you'll see there's a timeline surface snapped above the door. The timeline is called Confrontation Cutscene. It contains some more cameras and text displayers. Take a look at the timeline canvas. You can open it with L1 and X. Ah, there's a nice little space here for your camera and text displayer to go. Grab your camera in the scene with R2 and drag it over onto the timeline. Don't worry about messing up the shot. The camera gadget will snap to the timeline, but leave the gizmo in position. Now place Connie's text underneath the camera, so they're active at the same time. The time our camera and text displayer are visible is determined by their length on the timeline. So, if you want any text to display for longer, just scale it with the up directional button so that it fills more of the timeline. Or you can lengthen or shorten the clip by grabbing the trim handle on the end of the gadget with R2. The cameras and text displayers will stay in place in the scene, even if you move the timeline. We can't test the timeline just yet, though, because it's powered off. To turn it on, just open its tweak menu with L1 and square. Select the power button at the bottom of the menu to activate it. Shall we take a look in play mode? Wow, what a cliffhanger. The performances were superb, but I think the cameras on the timeline could do with a director's touch. Return to edit mode. Rewind time and start the next step when you want to continue. That was a great opening, but I think we can improve some of the cameras. Make sure you have the timeline open. We don't need to be able to see it, but the cameras will be hidden if it's closed. Fly over to Cuthbert and find the camera behind him. Open its tweak menu with L1 and square and move it to one side. We don't need to tweak anything just yet, but having it open will mean we can use it at the same time as editing the camera. Now scope into the camera with L1 and X to start editing it. When this camera is active, it's focused on Cuthbert, even though he's got his back to it. I think it would be better if Connie was in focus, and to do that, we need to adjust the focus distance and aperture. Try changing the aperture slider by grabbing it with X. The higher the aperture, the more blurry Connie becomes. But if you increase the focus distance, she'll come back into focus. At high aperture, only the parts of the scene that are near the camera's focus distance are sharp. With a low aperture, even objects in the far distance will be in focus. This effect is called depth of field. It's a nifty technique for drawing the eye of the viewer. We don't want to lose too much detail in the foreground, though, so about 30% should be enough. Techniques like this can really help tell a story by directing the viewer's eye to the important parts of the scene. For some extra dramatic punch, you could create a keyframe animation to pull focus so it switches from Cuthbert to Connie. Take a look at how keyframes have been used on the timeline to create the dramatic zoom in on Connie with the third camera. You can learn about keyframe animations in the Keyframes and Timelines tutorial. Look for it in the animation section of the Dreams workshop. Move on to the next step when you're ready to get deeper with dialogue. Text displayers are great for adding captions and titles, but for more complicated conversations, we need a more powerful gadget. Go to the Assembly menu and navigate back to the Movers and Outputs section of the Gadgets menu. In the menu, find the Dialogue text displayer. The icon is 2 connected speech bubbles. Select it with X, then stamp one into the scene. Unequip it from your IMP, then open the Dialogue text displayer's Tweak menu. The Dialogue text displayer is used to create branching conversations with multiple choice answers. The first page has exactly the same options as the regular old text displayer. To continue the story, give Cuthbert a menacing one-liner to challenge Connie's resolve. The Dialogue text displayer has all the same customization options as the regular text displayer, so take some time to edit the appearance of the text. Just as with the standard text displayer, Dialogue text is pinned to the screen by default and can be grabbed, moved and resized by the IMP. If you want to use my script for the scene, you can find this Dialogue gadget in the tutorial collection. When you've finished writing Cuthbert's dialogue, start the next step and we'll do Connie's replies. Before we enter Connie's replies, there's a few other options I want to show you. Text displayers are great for adding captions and titles, but for more complicated conversations, we need a more powerful gadget. Go to the Assembly menu and navigate back to the Movers and Outputs section of the Gadgets menu. In the menu, find the Dialogue text displayer. The icon is 2 connected speech bubbles. Select it with X, then stamp one into the scene. Unequip it from your IMP, then open the Dialogue text displayer's Tweak menu. The Dialogue text displayer is used to create branching conversations with multiple choice answers. The first page has exactly the same options as the regular old text displayer. To continue the story, give Cuthbert a menacing one-liner to challenge Connie's resolve. The Dialogue text displayer has all the same customization options as the regular text displayer, so take some time to edit the appearance of the text. Just as with the standard text displayer, Dialogue text is pinned to the screen by default and can be grabbed, moved and resized by the IMP. If you want to use my script for the scene, you can find this Dialogue gadget in the tutorial collection. When you've finished writing Cuthbert's dialogue, start the next step and we'll do Connie's replies. And can be grabbed, moved and some time to edit. Exactly the same options as the regular old text displayer. To continue the story, give Cuthbert a menacing one-liner to challenge Connie's resolve. The Dialogue text displayer has all the same customization options as the regular text displayer, so take some time to edit the appearance of the text. Just as with the standard text displayer, Dialogue text is pinned to the screen by default and can be grabbed, moved and resized by the IMP. If you want to use my script for the scene, you can find this Dialogue gadget in the tutorial collection. When you've finished writing Cuthbert's dialogue, start the next step and we'll do Connie's replies. Before we enter Connie's replies, there's a few other options I want to show you. Go to the Settings page of the Tweak menu. Select the button with the elephant icon. This'll turn the dialogue into a big gadget. This means the text will be visible on the gadget tile. Now select the next tab, the one with the crossed circle icon. On this page, you can add an option to skip or close the dialogue. The circle button is the default for closing the dialogue text. You can show the prompt on screen by selecting the button with the open eye icon. Close prompts are useful if you don't want a multiple-choice response, like at the end of a dialogue sequence. We want to give Connie some options, though, so head to the Dialogue Properties page. Select the tab with the speech bubbles icon. Here we can create some dialogue options for Connie's comebacks. The different responses can be selected using the controller buttons shown on the left. If you use the same button for dialogue as you did for a close prompt, the dialogue will take priority. To keep things simple, we'll give Connie 2 dialogue options to choose from. Use the text boxes next to the X and circle button icons to give Connie 2 different responses to Cuthbert's challenge. Use the video controls to pause if you need time to write your dialogue. Connie's lines will appear underneath Cuthbert's. Grab them with your imp to arrange them and resize them. When you've got the dialogue how you want it, close the tweak menu with L1 and circle, then start the next step. The dialogue gadget now has some extra output ports for the 2 button options. Using these ports, we can turn our piece of dialogue into a branching conversation. But first, we'll need some more dialogue. On Cuthbert's shed, you'll find a microchip gadget. Open it up with L1 and X and take a look to see what's going on in there. Here's the rest of the script ready to go. The conversation has 2 branches. In one, Connie tries to arrest Cuthbert. In the other, she questions him about the stolen candy. Depending on the player's choices, they'll end up at one of these 4 endings. On the left of the microchip, I've left a little space for you to place your dialogue text displayer. This will be the start of Connie and Cuthbert's confrontation. Grab your dialogue gadget with R2 and place it on the microchip. It'll automatically snap to the canvas. To progress the conversation, we need to connect the circle and X outputs to the rest of the dialogue. Create a wire from the circle output port of the dialogue gadget that you created. Extend that wire over to one of the next 2 dialogue gadgets and connect it to the start text input. Now create a wire from the X output port and connect it to the other dialogue gadget. Branching dialogue logic can get messy, so using microchips is essential if you want to keep a semblance of order to your scene. We now have a complete dialogue tree. In the next step, I'll show you how to connect a camera to the dialogue. There's one more thing we need to connect to our dialogue. A camera. You'll find a spare one on the microchip, but you can edit it or add your own if you want to. Tweak the first dialogue text displayer and go to the Inputs and Outputs page. Find the button with a waveform icon. This port is active whenever the text is on screen, which makes it perfect for triggering a camera. Create a wire from the text active output using R2 or X. Extend the wire over to the camera and connect it to the power port. The dialogue is ready to go. We just need to connect it up to the timeline so that it'll activate once the cutscene has finished. The confrontation cutscene has a wire connecting it to a counter gadget. This bit of logic takes the pulse signal from the timeline and turns it into a constant signal to power the microchip. You can learn more about this in the wiring and logic tutorial. To activate the microchip, create a wire from the counter full output on the counter and connect it to the power port of the microchip. Then switch over to play mode and test the dialogue. That started off well, but it never reached a satisfying conclusion. So often the way, isn't it? In the next step, I'll show you how you can end the scene with a bang. This showdown between Connie and Cuthbert needs a big finish. On the right side of the microchip are two gadgets. One called Win and one called Lose. You can tell from this icon in the corner that they're both microchips. These microchips contain two cutscenes, one where Connie defeats Cuthbert and one where he sends her packing. Connie and Cuthbert's conversation has 4 possible conclusions. 1 will activate the win ending, the other 3 will lead to the lose ending. Let's start with the win condition. Pick one of the dialogue conclusions. I'm using the one at the bottom. On the right edge of the gadget, you'll see a port with a square stop symbol icon. The port will send a signal when the dialogue text is finished. As there are no dialogue responses set up in these gadgets, they're finished using a close prompt instead. We'll use this port to activate the microchip. Create a wire on the text finished port, then extend it over to the Win microchip. Connect the wire to the microchip's power port. Now do the same with the other 3 dialogue conclusions. Except this time, connect them to the power of the lose ending. The stage is now set. The actors are ready. All that's left to do is play the scene and watch the drama unfold. Rewind the scene with L3, then switch over to play mode and see if you and Connie can get the better of Cuthbert. Connie and Cuthbert are at the Dreamiverse racetrack. They're testing out a new Cuthbot model of my design. Looks like Connie's already got the hang of it. Give it some welly, Cuthbert. Oops, maybe not on second thoughts. Join me over in edit mode, and I'll show you how to make a vehicle of your own. To get this Cuthbot operational, you'll need to add a few gadgets. The first step to making something controllable is to add a controller sensor. The controller sensor is mostly used in puppets, but it can be used to control anything. This Cuthbot is made from sculptures and connectors that are grouped together, so we need to scope into the group before we can start editing it. Hover your imp over Cuthbot, hold L1 and press X. On the front of Cuthbot's chassis, you'll find a microchip. This is where we'll put all the gubbins to get Cuthbot moving. Scope into the microchip with L1 and X. It looks like we've got some work to do. There's only a health manager set up. The microchip is surface snapped to Cuthbot, so all the gadgets inside it will act like they're surface snapped too. A useful feature of microchips is that once you've opened them, they will stay open even if you scope out of the group they're in. However, if you close the microchip, you'll need to scope back into Cuthbot to open it up again. Start the next step and we'll start building Cuthbot's controls. First on the agenda is to add a controller sensor. Then we'll be able to possess Cuthbot with the imp. Go to the assembly menu and select Gadgets. The controller sensor is found in Sensors and Input. Its icon is a controller and some cogs. Select it with X and stamp one on the left side of the microchip canvas, just to the right of the health manager. The controller sensor will be powering all the other gadgets, and in Dreams, signals run from left to right. Since the health manager's right here, let's hook that up first. When the health manager has no health, the controller sensor should get a signal to die. It sounds rather grisly, but it just means Cuthbot will be able to respawn if you drive off the track. Position your view so you can see the ports on the health manager and controller sensor. Now create a wire from the no health output on the health manager. Connect it to the die input on the controller sensor. And done. Now, if Cuthbot has an off-road excursion, you'll be back on track in no time. When you're ready for some more tinkering, move on to the next step. Let's dig a little deeper into the controller sensor. Open the controller sensor's tweak menu using L1 and the square button. Head to the Important Properties page. All these settings are to do with your imp, as you could probably tell from my hilarious pun. At the bottom, there's some options for changing the possession visual. This is how your imp will appear when it's possessing this controller sensor. Cuthbot has a little cockpit for the imp on top of its chassis. So change the possession visual to visible, body on target. A round gizmo with a face has appeared on Cuthbot. Move the tweak menu to the side with R2 if it's in the way. This gizmo shows where the imp will appear and in which direction it will face when Cuthbot is possessed. Before we move it, go to the Assembly menu and select Guides. Switch on Grid Snap and set the size to half. This will keep the imp gizmo oriented properly. Grab the gizmo with R2 and line it up in the cockpit on top of Cuthbot. Now we have a driver. Let's see how it looks. Close the tweak menu with L1 and circle, then switch over to play mode in the options menu. Possess Cuthbot with R2. Hooray! You've given Cuthbot life. But this is just the start. When you're ready to add more, go back to edit mode, rewind with L3, and start the next step. When you were in play mode, you might have noticed that Cuthbot's body tilted over. That's because it's movable, and when objects are made movable, they're affected by the physical forces in the scene. So before we get Cuthbot moving, we need to add some stabilisation. A gyroscope is the perfect gadget for this. It's used to keep objects upright. Go to the Assembly menu and select Gadgets. Close the Sensors and Input menu with Circle, then open Movers and Output. Look for the gyroscope icon in the menu. Select it with X and stamp one onto the microchip canvas. The gyroscope doesn't need to be connected to any other gadgets. It just has to be attached to the object you want it to stabilise. Unequip the gadget by pressing the circle button. Now open the gyroscope tweak menu. In the tweak menu, look for the slider with the beefy arm icon. This is the gyroscope's strength. The stronger the gyroscope is, the more easily it'll overcome the forces in the scene. Drag it all the way up to 100%. That'll keep Cuthbot perfectly balanced. To keep Cuthbot upright, the gyroscope needs to know which direction is up. That's what this arrow gizmo on Cuthbot is for. By grabbing and moving the arrow, you can change the orientation of the gyroscope. It looks perfect as it is, so close the tweak menu, then click R3 to check the gyroscope is working. Solid as a rock. When you're ready to get motoring, rewind with L3 and start the next step. Right then, let's get Cuthbot moving. For that, we'll need a mover. If you've closed Cuthbot's microchip, scope back in and open it up again with L1 and X. Go to the Assembly menu, then select Gadgets. In the Movers and Output menu, see if you can find the mover. Its icon is a box and an arrow. Select it with X. Stamp a mover on the right side of the microchip, then unequip the gadget with Circle. As the microchip is surface snapped to Cuthbot, anything on its canvas will also behave like it's surface snapped. This also means that moving the microchip will affect the position and behaviour of all the gadgets inside, so make sure it's positioned where you want it before tweaking the mover. Now select the mover with X. Selecting a gadget, or opening its tweak menu, reveals its gizmos. If any other gadgets have their gizmos visible, just close their tweak menus or deselect them with X. The mover gizmo shows which direction it defines as forwards. So at the moment, the mover's gizmo is pointing in the wrong direction for Cuthbot. Before moving the gizmo, make sure you still have Grid Snap activated in the Guides menu. Then grab the mover's arrow gizmo and point it in the direction you want Cuthbot to move. You can use gizmos without Grid Snap, but it's tricky to get them lined up exactly. Now click R3 and Cuthbot should move in the direction of the arrow. I don't think we'll be setting any Dreamiverse speed records, but we're on the right track. Click L3 to rewind the scene, then start the next step when you're ready. Now we've got Cuthbot moving, let's see how we can control it. We'll start by connecting the mover to the controller sensor. The port we need isn't available on the outside of the gadget, so open up the controller sensor's tweak menu with L1 and square. By default, tweak menus are pinned to the screen. But if you want to arrange them in the scene space, just deselect the Pin to Screen option at the top of the tweak menu. You can also save the position of tweak menus so they always open in the same place. Just select the anchor icon at the top of the tweak menu to save its position. We're going to use the R2 button to make Cuthbot move. On the first page of the controller sensor tweak menu, you'll find all the controller buttons. Create a wire from the R2 output port of the controller sensor using R2 or X. Extend the wire across to the mover. Connect it to the forward speed input. Now close the controller sensor tweak menu. Before we try it out, let's give the mover a bit more juice, as it was painfully slow before. We'll take care of that in the next step. Right, let's see if we can give Cuthbot a bit more oomph. Open the mover's tweak menu and use X to increase the forward speed slider. "50 meters per second should be a bit more lively. We should also set the mover to work in local space. This means that the direction of the mover will move with Cuthbot. This will be super important when we add steering to Cuthbot's logic. At the moment, the mover is working in scene space. When set up like this, this will be super important when we add steering to Cuthbot's logic. At the moment, the mover is working in scene space. When set up like this, the mover will go in the direction of the arrow, no matter what direction Cuthbot is facing. This would make it impossible for Cuthbot to turn. Select the button with X to switch to local space. Now, if you grab and move the arrow gizmo, you'll see the axes move with it. Make sure the arrow gizmo is pointing forward. If you've still got grid snap turned on, it'll snap exactly into place. Now when Cuthbot turns, the direction of the mover will turn too. Now close the tweak menu, then switch over to play mode and give it a go. That's a bit more like it. Go back to edit mode and rewind the scene with L3. In the next step, we'll give Cuthbot a reverse gear. That's a bit more like it. The direction of the mover, we've still got grid snap turned on. It'll be arrow scene space. When set up like this, the mover will go in the direction of the arrow, no matter what direction Cuthbot is facing. This would make it impossible for Cuthbot to turn. Select the button with X to switch to local space. Now if you grab and move the arrow gizmo, you'll see the axes move with it. Make sure the arrow gizmo is pointing forward. If you've still got grid snap turned on, it'll snap exactly into place. Now when Cuthbot turns, the direction of the mover will turn too. Now close the tweak menu, then switch over to play mode and give it a go. That's a bit more like it. Go back to edit mode and rewind the scene with L3. In the next step, we'll give Cuthbot a reverse gear. Now we've got Cuthbot moving, let's see how we can control it. Right then, let's get Cuthbot. When you were in play mode, you might have noticed that Cuthbot's body tilted over. That's because it's movable, and when objects are made movable, they're affected by the physical forces in the scene. So before we get Cuthbot moving, we need to add some stabilisation. A gyroscope is the perfect gadget for this. It's used to keep objects upright. Drag it all the way up to 100%. That'll keep Cuthbot perfectly balanced. By grabbing and moving the arrow, you can change the orientation of the gyroscope. It looks perfect as it is, so close the tweak menu, then click Right then. Now we've got Cuthbot moving, let's see. Start by connecting outside of the gadget. Select the They Always Open tweak menu. You'll find all the controller buttons. Connect it to the sensor using R tweak menu. You'll find sensor using R2 or X. Extend the wire across to the mover. Connect it to the forward speed input. Now close the controller sensor tweak menu. Before we try it out, let's give the mover a bit more juice, as it was painfully slow before. We'll take care of that in the next step. Right, let's see if we can give Cuthbot a bit more oomph. 50 meters per second should be a bit more lively. We should also set the mover to work in local space. This means that the direction of the mover will move with Cuthbot. This will be super important when we add steering to Cuthbot's logic. At the moment, the mover is working in scene space. When set up like this, now that we have a forward gear, we need to set up reverse. We can do this using the same mover gadget. But if we want to use a different button for reverse, we'll need to use a combiner. Go to the Gadgets menu and open Logic and Processing. The icon for the combiner is two lines converging into an arrow. Stamp one onto the microchip canvas between the controller sensor and the mover. Unequip the combiner with the circle button. An important thing to know about wires is that they can carry more than one signal. Wires carrying multiple signals are called fat wires. The combiner can make fat wires by taking signals from multiple inputs and combining them into one. Take a look at the inputs on the combiner. This combiner will combine a positive signal and a negative one. By wiring the controller sensor through the combiner, we can use R2 for acceleration and L2 for deceleration and reversing. Hover your imp over the wire going into the mover so that it highlights. Grab it with R2 to unplug it, then connect the wire to the positive input port of the combiner instead. If the controller sensor tweak menu isn't already open, open it up now with L1 and square. For reverse, create a wire from the L2 output of the controller sensor. Extend the wire over to the combiner and connect it to the negative input port. Finally, select the output port of the combiner with R2 or X and connect a wire to the forward speed input of the mover. So now the wire going into the mover is carrying a positive signal to accelerate with R2 and a negative signal to brake and reverse with L2. Don't just take my word for it though. Give it a try in play mode. Now we're really motoring. All we need now is the ability to steer. Don't just take my word for it. Positive signal to accelerate with R2 and a negative signal to brake and reverse with L2. Don't just take my word for it though. Give it a try in play mode. Now we're really motoring. All we need now is the ability to steer Cuthbot. We'll get cracking with that in the next step. When you've finished testing Cuthbot, return to edit mode and rewind with L3. We'll need some steering if Cuthbot's going to get round these corners. As Cuthbot only has 2 wheels, we can keep things simple and use a rotator to steer. Go to the assembly menu and navigate back to movers and outputs. Close any open submenus with circle if they're in the way. The icon for the rotator is a cube with a dotted line around it. Select it with X and stamp one above the mover. Then unequip the gadget with circle. Open up the rotator's tweak menu so we can make sure that its gizmo is oriented correctly. If any other gadgets have their gizmos in the way, close their tweak menus or deselect them with X. The rotator gizmo shows the rotation axis and speed. At the moment, the plane of rotation is aligned vertically. That'll be no use for steering. Grab the long handle of the gizmo with R2 and move it up so the rotation is in the horizontal plane. Make sure you're using grid snap, otherwise it'll be very difficult to align it accurately. The moving line in the gizmo shows the rotation is anti-clockwise. Click R3 to test it. The rotator might need a bit more strength. Robots are heavy things. In the tweak menu, try increasing the rotation strength. It's the slider with the muscly arm. That's done the trick. About 90% is strong enough. Rewind time with L3. Close the tweak menu with L1 and circle. In the next step, we'll connect the rotator to the controller sensor. We're going to steer Cuthbot with the left stick. Open the controller sensor's tweak menu with L1 and square, then go to the third page. You'll find left and right stick outputs on the second page too, but the ones on the third page are local outputs. Local just means that left and right is defined in relation to the controller sensor. So just like with local space on the mover, using the local outputs means left on the stick will be Cuthbot's left, rather than left from the camera's perspective. Remember, you can always find out more info about buttons just by hovering your imp over them for a few seconds. The left stick output doesn't just send signals for left and right though, it also goes up and down. But we only need left and right for steering, so we need to split the signal. Go to the assembly menu and back to logic and processing. Look for the splitter. The icon is a line splitting into two arrows. Select it with X and stamp one on the microchip canvas, between the controller sensor and the rotator. The splitter does the opposite of what the combiner does. It splits fat wires into their individual signals. Now select the left stick local output of the controller sensor with R2 or X to create a wire. Connect it to the splitter's input port. The splitter has now split the left stick wire into two parts, X and Y. Or left-right and up-down, as they're more commonly known. The X output, left-right, is what we need, so create a wire with X or R2 and connect it up to the rotator's rotation speed input. Time for a test drive. Switch over to play mode and give Cuthbot a go. Cuthbot's steering's not very responsive. And it seems we've got left and right back to front. How can that be? Looks like we've got some more work to do. Go back to edit mode, rewind the scene with L3, and go to the next step. While you were testing your Cuthbot, I quickly tidied up my logic. It never hurts to keep your logic neat and tidy, but I'm not here to judge. Tidy logic is much easier to follow, and also easier to fix when it goes wrong. Speaking of which, Cuthbot's steering needs a bit of tweaking. At the moment, it's very heavy, and left and right are the wrong way round. The good news is, we can fix both these problems just by tweaking the rotator speed. The rotator has plenty of power, but it just doesn't turn enough, so increasing the speed should help. Grab the rotation speed slider with X and drag it to the left. But you said increase the speed, I hear you say. Indeed I did. But to get left and right the right way round, we also need to reverse the direction of the rotator. Once you've dragged the slider down to 0, it'll stop. But if you let go of X and grab the slider again, you'll be able to drag it into negative values. Set the rotation speed to about -700 meters per second. The speed slider will snap back to 0 when you let go of it, as we're setting the maximum speed, not the current speed. That should do it. Cuthbot is now ready for the track. Before we play the scene, let's just quickly review the logic. The controller sensor generates the signals that power the rest of the logic. The fat wire from the left stick local output is split into its X and Y signals. Then the X is used to change the rotation speed of the rotator. The R2 and L2 buttons are combined into a fat wire, carrying a positive and a negative signal. The fat wire powers the forward speed of the mover. The positive signal accelerates and the negative decelerates. This simple logic is all you need to create the foundation for a vehicle. As you learn more about logic, you can expand on it to create more sophisticated handling. Time to take Cuthbot for a spin. Switch over to play mode and see if you can complete the course. If your movement or steering isn't working the way you expected, switch back to edit mode and take a look at the tweak menus for the mover and rotator. Make sure the gizmos are correctly oriented and check that the mover is using local space. If you want a new Cuthbot to work on, you can find one in the tutorial collection. When you're finished tinkering, cross the finish line to complete the tutorial.